Have you ever witnessed a moment so tense that everything hinges on a single choice? In our story, a determined human officer is faced with a desperate alien ally whose arm is trapped in a rapidly hardening adhesive, a situation where most would opt for a brutal, immediate solution. Yet he refuses to amputate. Instead, he fights against all odds to preserve her limb. That electrifying act of defiance and resourcefulness sets the stage for an interstellar quest filled with courage, unexpected alliances, and revelations that shake the Galactic Council. If you want to know how this high-stakes rescue unfolds and what fate awaits the entire galaxy, be sure to experience the story from start to finish. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and support us so we can continue bringing you more thrilling and heartfelt sci-fi adventures. A harsh, acrid stench filled the dimly lit maintenance corridor, mingling with the electric hum of emergency lights that flickered at irregular intervals along the low ceiling. Lieutenant Commander Jonas Carter braced his shoulders against the tight walls, trying to give himself enough space to inspect the figure stumbling before him. That figure was Ariessa Ven, an Irian security operative whose metallic blue skin reflected the weak red tint of the emergency lamps in eerie flashes. She clutched her left arm, grimacing with each strained breath. A viscous amber substance coated her forearm, already beginning to crystallize and spread upward toward her shoulder. With every passing second, the alien adhesive constricted more tightly, fusing her flesh to her torso and sending sharp jolts of pain through her system. Jonas knew that time was running out. The entire facility was on lockdown, and they could both hear the rhythmic pounding of boots echoing from some distant corridor. The Arian's short, snowy white hair clung to her temples, matted with sweat and the residue of the thick glue that threatened to claim her entire limb. Overhead, pipes and conduits rattled in response to the facility's sporadic power fluctuations, each flicker of light painting fresh shadows across Jonas's scarred combat armor. "Hold on," he said with a firm tone, stepping carefully to Ariessa's side. She tried to pull away, half expecting him to do what most might have considered the logical course, amputate the arm and prevent the substance from spreading further. With a tight-lipped grimace, she managed to whisper, You'll have to remove it." Her large, gold-flecked eyes, a trademark of her species, flickered with resignation. "It's either that or lose more than just the arm." The corridor shook as a muted explosion rattled the overhead pipes. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, coating Jonas's broad shoulders in a thin gray film. Through the swirl of debris, he locked eyes with Ariessa. "I'm not cutting off anything," he said with resolute finality. "There's always another way, if you're stubborn enough." Ariessa's breath came in ragged bursts. Her people were known for their calm composure even under duress, but now panic laced every fiber of her being. The adhesive had been part of an experimental anti-intruder system, ironically designed to protect vital areas of the research station. Instead of preventing infiltration, it had misfired and nearly claimed her as a victim. She was well aware of the typical remedies: strong acids, advanced lasers, or amputation if things progressed too far. Yet Jonas's refusal to take any of those standard measures caught her off guard. She glanced at his gloved hands working rapidly at his tactical belt, retrieving small vials and a palm-sized device that glowed with pale blue circuitry. "Jonas," she began, her voice weakened by pain. He didn't look up from his makeshift tinkering. "Trust me, I can reverse its bonding mechanism if I send the right signal. I just need to alter the polarity." The words came out clipped, laden with urgency and confidence. Her species had encountered humans before, known them to be either rash or remarkably resilient, depending on the individual, but she had never met anyone quite as tenacious as Jonas Carter. That unyielding determination radiated from him, and for a moment it rekindled her hope. "What's in that device?" Ariessa asked, forcing her voice above the dull roar of the malfunctioning ventilation system. Steam hissed from vents along the corridor, thickening the air with heated humidity. The maintenance tunnel they occupied was narrow, barely enough room for Jonas's muscled frame to maneuver, and reeked of burnt wiring. Ariessa's gaze flickered between Jonas's face and the contraption he was piecing together from several smaller tools. He adjusted a small dial on one side of the improvised gadget. A portable electrochemical regulator. Jonas replied, eyes narrowing in concentration. The Earth-based Arcturian Defense Corps once used something similar, back in the Zarin campaign. We had an adhesive that fused polymer plating to damaged hull segments. The compound's structure was reliant on certain charged molecules. Change the polarity, and you break it apart. At least, that's the theory. Ariasa's upper lip twitched in pain, and she inhaled sharply, trying not to cry out. She felt as if her arm was caught in a vice. The material stiffened every second, pulling her skin taut. "Just do it," she said through gritted teeth, bracing herself. "I can't stand this much longer." Jonas nodded, pressing the palm-sized device directly against the hardened adhesive. The moment the device activated, it emitted a subtle hum. Ariasa felt a peculiar vibration pierce through her limb, a wave of energy that resonated with the crystallizing material. For several agonizing heartbeats, it felt like nothing was changing, as though Jonas's plan had failed. But then, to her astonishment, the adhesive began to soften at its edges. Parts of it crumbled into coarse flakes that fell to the metal floor with faint clinks. Relief coursed through Ariasa in a shuddering sigh. She could finally flex her fingers, even if only slightly. Jonas inched the device around the perimeter of the glued zone, targeting each thick patch. "Hold steady," he cautioned, sensing she wanted to move. "We have to make sure every bit of this stuff loses its grip, or it'll keep spreading." As the last remnants of the adhesive flaked off, Ariasa gingerly rolled her shoulder, testing the mobility of the joint. Pain still radiated through the muscle, but she was no longer locked in place. She looked up at Jonas, her gold-flecked eyes bright with gratitude. "I can't believe that actually worked," she managed, her voice still ragged. "Most would have just taken the direct approach." "Direct approach," Jonas barked a short laugh, reattaching his makeshift device to his belt. "Don't you know humans by now? We're notoriously difficult about taking what everyone else calls the only option." He rotated his own shoulders, readjusting the straps of his battered armor. "Anyway, we're not out of the woods yet." A distant explosion rattled the corridor walls again. The overhead lights flickered to complete darkness for a second before returning to a weak, amber glow. Jonas scanned the area, his acute senses honed by years of covert operations. "We need to keep moving," he said. "If that was a trap for us, it failed, and they'll be sending more trouble our way." Ariasa clenched her now free hand into a fist. Nodding, she checked the sidearm strapped to her thigh. "I can fight," she assured him, though the tremor in her voice betrayed lingering pain and fatigue. Jonas placed a steady hand on her shoulder. He led her onward through the twisting tunnel, a labyrinth of metal plating and steam vents that hissed at random intervals. Overhead, black and yellow caution stripes were partly obscured by grime, and each turn looked maddeningly similar. Ariasa found herself amazed at Jonas's navigational intuition. Humans had relatively short lifespans compared to Irians, yet the best among them could accomplish feats of orientation under pressure that rivaled the galaxy's greatest scouts. They stopped at an intersection where the maintenance corridor split into three narrower passages. Jonas scanned the overhead markings. One arrow pointed to an environmental control hub, another to a cargo bay sub-entrance, and the third, barely visible, led toward an auxiliary control section. "You mentioned earlier that the facility was storing some kind of new weapon, right?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder at Ariasa. She leaned against the damp wall for a moment, catching her breath. "I found references in the station logs, something about specialized adhesives, toxins, and other methods of incapacitation. This place wasn't just a research lab, it's a weapons factory disguised as a simple security facility." Jonas's gray eyes narrowed. "Then we have to find proof, something to take to the right people. If we just run, who knows how many more of these weapons will end up in unscrupulous hands." Ariasa nodded. "Agreed, but we have to be careful. The infiltration teams that tried to investigate these labs before either disappeared or came back with incomplete intel. Most never made it this far." She rubbed her freed arm, still marred with faint lines where the adhesive had pressed into her skin. They decided to move toward the auxiliary control section, hoping to gain access to the facility's mainframe. Jonas was certain they could bypass security protocols there if they worked quickly and quietly. He motioned for Ariessa to stay close. In response, she fell in step behind him, her sidearm raised. Every hiss of steam or hiss of metal on metal made her body tense, expecting another ambush. After what felt like an eternity of sneaking through cramped passages, they paused at a hatch overhead. A chipped label indicated it led to a service shaft that might bypass the central corridors where security patrols were likely thickest. Jonas boosted Ariessa upward, and she popped the latch with a practiced motion. A waft of staler air greeted them, intermingled with the faint tang of spilled chemicals. The shaft was just wide enough to fit them if they crawled. Jonas removed a piece of plating from the edge, creating a crude foothold. Sometimes, he muttered, pushing himself up after her, the best solution isn't the easiest or the most comfortable. Ariessa smirked. Irayan infiltration training includes contortion drills. Humans do something similar, I presume. Jonas grunted, wedging himself in place. We crawl through worse in basic training. He replaced the loose panel behind them, shutting out the faint glow of the corridor. Together they sank into darkness, lit only by a small beam from Jonas's wrist lamp. Let's hope this road takes us closer to that control center without giving them a chance to corner us. She nodded, swallowing her discomfort. The enclosed space forced them close together, their breathing mingling in the still air. The uncertain future weighed on them both, yet a silent, unspoken connection pulsed between them. They had already proven they worked well under pressure. Ariessa found herself oddly comforted by Jonas's presence, his unwavering courage in the face of danger. Crawling through the shaft proved both physically taxing and psychologically draining. The space was uncomfortably cramped, making every shift of limb a test in coordination. Metallic edges scraped along armor plates, occasionally catching exposed skin or cloth. The whir of hidden fans deeper in the ducts created gusts of musty air that made it difficult to discern approaching threats. Ariessa moved with practiced caution. Her species, while taller and more slender than most humans, were also quite limber, and she navigated tight turns more easily than Jonas did. He, on the other hand, had to twist his torso to avoid snagging the heavier plates of his combat gear. More than once, he paused to muffle a grunt of annoyance. This might test my patience more than any firefight, Jonas whispered through clenched teeth. In response, Ariessa gestured for him to keep his voice down. Her sensitive hearing caught faint echoes of footsteps somewhere below and behind them, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly how far. Finally, they reached a junction in the shaft where the overhead space opened up slightly, allowing them to sit up. Ariessa used the reprieve to stretch out her stiff limbs, wincing as the memory of the adhesive's pressure lingered in her muscles. Across from her, Jonas used the moment to examine a digital readout on his wrist device. He tapped a small screen displaying the station's emergency blueprint, courtesy of some hacking skills he'd picked up in a past mission. We're close, he mouthed, voice low, to an intersection that leads down into the auxiliary control hallway. He panned a digital map with a swipe. If we drop down here, he pointed to a small vent symbol on the blueprint, we should be right above the console cluster. Then we can hack in. Ariessa arched an eyebrow. You're sure we'll be able to override the main security from a secondary console? Not entirely, Jonas admitted, but we have to try. The truth was, they had no guarantee any of this would work. The facility's security protocols were advanced, rumored to be partially AI-driven, and might already be aware of their presence. But it was also their best shot. Ariessa could feel Jonas's confidence wavering slightly, a tiny crack in his otherwise steadfast facade. Humans were known for their emotional range, and it was that same capacity for worry, hope, and empathy that often drove them to achieve impossible feats. She placed a reassuring hand on Jonas's wrist guard. We'll do it together, she said softly. We've come this far. Let's finish this, no matter the risk. The faint glow of his wrist lamp revealed a half-smile tugging at his lips. In that moment, Ariessa realized she'd rarely seen him relax his guard enough to smile. The subtle motion lit a spark in her, a sense of camaraderie and something more. They pressed on, lowering themselves through a horizontal vent that fed into a grated opening in the corridor's ceiling. Jonas took point, carefully unscrewing the grate with his multi-tool. The screws squeaked in protest, but he managed to keep the noise to a minimum. When it finally came free, he gently lowered the metal piece into his arms. Beneath them, the corridor glowed with half-powered lighting, computer terminals lining the walls. Jonas's combat boots hit the floor first, producing a muted clank that reverberated in the still air. Ariessa dropped gracefully beside him, scanning the area with her pistol at the ready. The corridor, labeled Auxiliary Control Access in faded stenciling, stretched in both directions, flanked by closed doors and flickering overhead panels. Computerized beeps echoed from behind a set of sliding metal doors, and Ariessa guessed that was where the main console cluster waited. They crept forward, using the corridor's shadows for cover. A single security camera sat in one corner, its lens rotating left to right in a mechanical sweep. Jonas signaled Ariessa with 2 fingers, indicating he would distract or disable it while she moved. In a well-practiced motion, she darted under the camera's blind spot, flattening herself against the wall. Jonas, meanwhile, aimed a specialized optical disruptor. The lens wavered, flickered, then froze, as though losing power. Satisfied, Jonas moved to join her. Inside the control room, they found several tall pillars of blinking monitors, each covered in data streams about the station's systems, environmental controls, external sensors, and a separate cluster of restricted files flagged with hazard symbols. Ariessa took her place at the primary console, hooking a portable encryption buster into the system's port. She tapped the device's interface, scanning rows of code that scrolled past at high speed. "This is heavily encrypted," she mumbled. "They've layered multiple security measures. Give me a minute." Jonas kept watch near the doorway, his weapon drawn. "You have exactly 1 minute," he half-joked, though tension threaded his tone. "We're too exposed here." Ariessa's eyes swept across the lines of alien script. Her kind was known for quick pattern recognition, a survival trait developed from centuries of solving intricate puzzles on their resource-scarce planet. She narrowed her gaze, isolating a suspicious cluster of code that blinked rapidly. "Found it," she whispered. "They have entire catalogs of weapon prototypes, adhesive bonds, targeted viral agents for different species, and some references to specialized energy traps. This is more than just a security measure. It's an arsenal designed to paralyze or disable across a variety of physiologies." Jonas's jaw tightened. That means they're planning to use it against multiple species, not just the Irians or humanity. The question is why? He stepped closer as Ariessa's device began downloading the data. "We need to get this intel out before it disappears forever." As soon as he said it, the monitors flickered. A computerized voice chirped. "Intrusion detected. Countermeasures enabled." A red alert stripe flashed across the screen, and the overhead lights shifted to a pulsing crimson that bathed the room in an ominous glow. Ariessa cursed under her breath as the console locked out her device with a harsh beep. Jonas whipped around just in time to see a ripple in the air near the doorway. A crackling barrier materialized across the threshold. Shimmering with lethal energy, it sealed them inside. He fired a shot at the barrier, only to watch the projectile disintegrate on impact. "They just quarantined us," he muttered. "I doubt the facility's keepers want us leaving with their secrets." Ariessa's eyes flicked over her console, searching for a manual override. The entire system responded sluggishly. "We've got to find a different way," she said, thinking back to Jonas's motto about not giving up. "Let's see what else is in this room." Jonas scanned the perimeter, noticing a smaller door at the far side of the chamber, unmarked and half obscured by stacked crates of old electronics. He motioned for Ariessa to cover him as he approached, carefully pushing aside the crates. The door's control panel blinked amber in standby mode. He tried the handle. Locked. Not surprising, given the security meltdown. "Stand back," he said, pulling out a small, shaped charge device from a compartment on his belt. Ariessa raised an eyebrow. Humans excelled at blunt solutions, but Jonas, she noted, always seemed to balance brute force with precision. He affixed the charge at the edge of the door near the lock mechanism. "We're not leaving without that data," he told Ariessa. "Download what you can." She reattached her encryption buster and resumed her frantic hacking attempts. Part of the data had already been captured before the system locked her out. She needed just a few more seconds to scrape the remaining files from the hidden directories. Meanwhile, Jonas triggered the shape charge, a controlled pop that rocked the door but didn't produce a giant blast. The lock housing buckled, metal groaned, and the door hissed open a crack. Before they could celebrate, the overhead alert system crackled to life again. Containment breach, deploying security drones. A low hum reverberated in the corridor outside, followed by the metallic clank of something rolling toward them. Jonas's heart pounded. Security drones typically carried heavy stun weaponry or lethal defenses, sometimes small-scale adhesives to trap intruders. He waved for Ariessa to hurry. She tore the encryption buster free, a beep indicating partial success. "Got most of it," she called, slinging the device around her shoulder. Jonas pried the damaged door open further, revealing a narrow hall with flickering overhead lights. Together, they slipped through just as the first security drone's sensor lens glowed in the main room behind them. The door hissed shut again, sparks crackling around the blasted lock. Ariessa's chest heaved. Pain lingered in her newly freed arm, but adrenaline surged through her veins. "That was too close," she rasped. "We need a place to finish the download." Jonas nodded, scanning the corridor. He recognized the layout from the blueprint, a route that should lead them deeper into the facility's underbelly. The starkly lit hallway gave off a menacing vibe. Warning signs plastered the walls in multiple galactic languages, referencing chemical hazards, high voltage lines, and contamination risks. "This leads to another cluster of maintenance tunnels," Jonas explained quietly. "From there, we might reach the main docking bay or an escape route. But we also need a secure terminal if we're going to transmit these files off-world or to an allied contact." Ariessa bit her lip. "Our best chance might be the sub-control center on the lower level. Let's see if the blueprint you have shows an emergency communications array." He tapped his wrist console, flicking through the digital map. A new red section blinked ominously, indicating damage or blocked passage. "Looks like some part of the station is in active meltdown. We'll have to circle around that. If we're lucky, there's an auxiliary communication station near the cargo lifts." She exhaled, forcing composure. "Then let's go." They started down the hall, boots echoing on the grated floor. Jonas's posture was tense, each step measured. Ariessa sensed his readiness for whatever lay around the next corner. She realized that if not for him, she might have lost more than an arm back in that corridor. For a moment, she allowed herself a flicker of gratitude that humans were indeed so doggedly stubborn. A clamor of voices and heavy footsteps soon echoed from an intersecting corridor. Jonas held up a clenched fist, and both he and Ariessa ducked behind a row of large, cylindrical canisters labeled with cryptic hazard symbols. Their hearts thundered in their ears as flashlight beams danced across the corridor walls. A group of heavily armed guards in dark uniforms swept by, scanning the area with advanced rifles. Ariessa recognized the insignia on their shoulders, a special forces unit rumored to operate under clandestine council orders, possibly to safeguard illicit projects. One guard paused, shining a beam in the direction of the canisters. Ariessa felt Jonas's muscles tense beside her, hand drifting to the pistol at his hip. Her throat constricted as she recalled the half-dozen times in her life she'd been forced to hide like this, every nerve on edge. Each second stretched into an eternity. Yet fortune seemed to favor them. One of the guards received an urgent directive on his comm device, prompting the entire squad to move on. The footsteps receded, and the corridor fell silent once more. Jonas exhaled softly, then motioned for Ariessa to follow. He glanced at her with a faint spark of concern. "You all right?" he whispered, noticing the strain on her features. In truth, her arm still ached, and her body screamed for rest after hours of tension and adrenaline spikes. But she nodded. They continued in the guard's wake for a short distance, careful to keep enough space to avoid detection. Eventually, the corridor opened into a large antechamber dominated by cargo lifts. The lifts sat in a half circle, each leading to a different tier of the facility. Jonas pulled up the blueprint on his wrist console. "We need the second lift," he indicated. "It should take us to sub-level 3. That's where the auxiliary communication system might be accessible." Ariessa felt her skin prickle with unease. "Even if we get there, how do we know we can operate it? The system might be locked down." Jonas's response came with a small grin. "We'll handle it the same way we handled that adhesive. Find another way, no matter what." His voice was calm, yet held the steel edge of unwavering resolve. Ariessa found herself marveling again at the layered complexity of humans, seemingly reckless, but guided by an undercurrent of fierce compassion and refusal to accept defeat. They slipped into the second lift, pressing a worn button that lit up with an anemic glow. The doors shuddered before sliding closed, and the lift began its descent with a rumble. A jolt knocked them off balance, causing Ariessa to press against Jonas for stability. She felt the heat of his body through his armor, and unexpectedly, a rush of reassurance. The lights in the lift flickered again. For a moment, they were plunged into semi-darkness, faced with their reflections in the polished metal walls. Jonas, battle-hardened with scars etched into his brow. Ariessa, her blue skin flecked with lines of silver where the adhesive had begun to fuse. Yet both were expressions of quiet determination. The moment the door slid open again, they were prepared to confront whatever lay beyond. The cargo lift shuddered its way down to sub-level 3, rattling with each meter of descent, while Lieutenant Commander Jonas Carter and Ariessa Venn braced themselves against the unstable rails. A dull overhead light, flickering in and out, made the enclosed space feel all the more claustrophobic. Ariessa kept her mind on the partial data she'd extracted. Hours of infiltration work condensed onto a small encryption buster device now hidden under her belt. She could still sense the throbbing ache in her left arm, where that corrosive adhesive had nearly taken more than just skin. Even after Jonas's timely intervention, a phantom twinge remained, as if reminding her how close she'd come to losing her limb. Jonas eyed the old-fashioned console inside the lift, which looked like it hadn't been serviced in decades. Its screen displayed a shaky readout of the facility's schematics, with large red X's marking areas of severe damage or security lockdown. His memory flashed back to the incomplete blueprint he'd been referencing on his wrist device. "We're halfway there," he muttered, trying to maintain a confident edge. "Sub-level 3's comm station is just down a corridor from the lift. If it's still operational, we can transmit the data and blow this entire operation wide open." A loud snap cut through his words as the lift jerked to a halt, leaving them suspended in near darkness. Ariessa swore under her breath, checking her sidearm as though half expecting an ambush. "Power fluctuations," she noted, glancing up at the flickering overhead light. "The station must be rerouting energy or venting systems to purge the infiltration. We can't stay in here." Jonas jammed a button on the console. It spat sparks, then went dead. "We're not about to die in a broken elevator," he said, trying for levity. Quickly, he wedged his multi-tool into the panel, prying it open to reveal a service hatch. Above them, a small maintenance crawl space led out of the stalled elevator. "Up and around we go." Ariessa nodded, pulling herself through the access point. The cramped tunnel beyond was lined with dusty vents and cables that snaked in every direction. She paused to shine a small handheld lamp down the path, her snow-white hair brushing against low-hanging conduits. Jonas hoisted himself after her, the faint scuff of his boots echoing in the confined darkness. The smell of charred wiring choked the air, and the temperature rose with each meter they crawled. Behind them, a metal groan signaled the elevator's precarious status. They hurried, focusing on the vent that should drop them onto sub-level 3's main corridor. Ariessa took the lead now, aware that Jonas was scanning behind them for signs of pursuit. Since they'd managed to slip past the initial patrol, she suspected the facility's security forces would be spreading out, reactivating drones and sealing off key areas. The longer they lingered, the tighter the net would close. At last, they found a grated panel in the floor of the tunnel. Ariessa peered through its narrow slits to see a corridor lit by emergency lights, the floors below stained with what looked like chemical residue. A pungent tang wafted up. She swallowed, steeling herself for whatever lurked down there. Jonas carefully unscrewed the grate and held it aside while Ariessa dropped down, landing on silent feet. The corridor felt hotter, and the air tasted stale. The overhead fixtures flickered in a sluggish red strobe, confirming this level was in partial lockdown. Jonas joined her, glancing up and down the hallway. "Comm station's that way," he said, recalling the half-burned schematic. Ariessa nodded, exhaling slow. Their journey was far from over, and danger pressed in around them. But as she tested her still sore arm and felt the faint hum of adrenaline in her veins, she reminded herself of one unchangeable truth. Humans, especially Jonas, did not surrender easily. They headed cautiously down the corridor, the floor beneath them vibrating in response to some distant machinery. Alert klaxons reverberated through the walls, adding a sense of urgency to every step. The facility felt like a living organism, breathing and contracting around them, a beast waking up to crush intruders. Ariessa's mind raced, scanning each intersection for possible ambushes. She'd seen firsthand how advanced the security measures were, and she wondered if they might stumble on more of that insidious, adhesive compound. The corridor took a sharp turn to the right, revealing a pair of large doors with the universal comm station symbol plastered above in neon blue luminescence. Jonas approached the console near the door, his posture rigid and tense. An embedded sensor flickered in red, suggesting that the door was sealed from the other side. Figures, he muttered, trying to override it with his multi-tool. After a few attempts, the lock remained stubbornly engaged. "Step aside," Ariessa said, a determined set to her features. She unclipped a small device from her belt, a short-range pulse disruptor. "We can't exactly pick the lock without alerting the entire station, but maybe we can fry the internal mechanism." She pressed the device against the console. A shrill whine rose in pitch, culminating in a terse pop that echoed down the corridor. Sparks danced across the panel. The door hissed, opening just enough for them to slip through sideways. Jonas slid inside first, sidearm raised. The comm station was a wide, semicircular chamber lined with tall server racks. Flickering holographic screens displayed system statuses, partial outages, overridden protocols, and a variety of cryptic codes. A large central console faced a transparent partition that overlooked a labyrinth of pipes and cables beyond. The entire room smelled of overheated electronics. "This is it," Jonas said, keeping his voice low. He stepped toward the main console, which looked more intact than the half-destroyed terminals they'd seen earlier. Ariessa followed, already connecting her encryption buster. A wisp of smoke curled from the console's edges, but it powered up as she tapped the panel. Clusters of alien text and binary scrolled across the interface. She inhaled, forcing calm. "We can transmit the partial data we have, or try a deeper infiltration for more evidence. Either way, we need to signal allied contacts so this place can be shut down." Her fingers darted over the floating keys as she input coded commands. Jonas watched her with a quiet admiration that occasionally broke through his grim composure. "Go for maximum data," Jonas suggested. "If we can prove the scale of this project, no one at the council can brush it off as a rumor." The thought of a galactic cover-up or illicit arms dealing involving multiple species made his blood run cold. Humans had been maligned for their so-called stubbornness and unpredictability. Yet everything about this facility felt far more sinister than any human misstep he'd witnessed. Ariessa nodded, tapping rapidly. The console beeped, indicating that the encryption buster was actively sifting through hidden files. "We're in. Downloading," she murmured. "I'll queue up an emergency transmission. Maybe I can slip it past the facility's firewall if I cloak it as a routine systems report." She risked a glance over at Jonas. "I just hope we have enough time before they break in here." Before Jonas could reply, the overhead lights cut out abruptly. A single red emergency beam remained, casting unsettling shadows across the station. Then, with a startling crackle of static, the comm console's display changed, replaced by a security feed showing dozens of uniformed soldiers assembling in neat ranks. Above them, someone walked into frame, a tall man with silver-threaded hair and a crisp uniform bearing the insignia of an admiral from Earth's Defense Forces. Jonas's breath caught. "That's Admiral Patrick Morrison," Jonas managed, perplexed. "But what's he doing here?" Ariessa eyed the screen warily. Is he leading them, or are they leading him? Neither of them knew yet, but one thing was clear. They weren't just dealing with rogue scientists or unscrupulous mercenaries. This reached the highest levels of power, and if an Earth admiral was involved, the situation was more tangled than they ever expected. In the flickering light of the console, Jonas and Ariessa exchanged tense glances as they watched Admiral Patrick Morrison address the rows of soldiers in the security feed. A faint hiss of the audio feed played through the battered comm station speakers, though the words were garbled. Morrison's posture was controlled, his expression unreadable. Back on Earth, Morrison was widely respected, known for both strategic brilliance and unwavering loyalty to humanity's alliances. If he was involved in a clandestine weapons program, the implications were staggering. Ariasa's golden-flecked gaze darted to the data loading on her encryption buster. "Still processing?" she whispered, voice tight with anxiety. Her slender fingers danced across the console, trying to stabilize the feed. She managed to isolate a partial audio channel. "Expendable environment. Critical that we maintain the illusion, ensuring no direct evidence." A chill swept over Jonas. He's talking about illusions, evidence. Maybe he's orchestrating a cover for whoever truly runs this place. Part of him refused to believe that Admiral Morrison, the same man who'd led joint missions for peace, would be complicit in crimes against various species. But the conversation he was overhearing suggested something darker. Suddenly, the camera feed cut to static, replaced by the station's default security logo. With a frustrated sigh, Ariasa hammered a command into the console. "Whatever file they're using for the feed, it's being rerouted or purged. I've managed to secure some fragments, but not enough to fully decipher his role." Jonas slid next to her, quickly rechecking the corridor with a glance over his shoulder. "We need to figure out if Morrison is an ally playing a part or if he's truly gone rogue. Earth's relationship with the rest of the galaxy has always been tenuous. If an admiral is behind this, it'll confirm every fear the Council has about humans. Or," he paused, frowning, "he could be here to shut this down from the inside." Before Ariasa could answer, a low rumble shook the floors. The overhead lights flickered more violently, and several backup monitors blipped on, displaying environmental alerts. One read pressure differential engaged in stark red letters, while another indicated venting sequence activated. The temperature in the comm station seemed to spike by several degrees, and the walls groaned in protest. "They're flushing this level," Ariasa realized, her voice laced with urgency. "The station can use the environmental systems to create bursts of intense pressure or temperature, forcing intruders out or killing them if they won't leave." Jonas clenched his jaw. "Then we can't waste time. Did you get enough data for a broadcast?" The alarms were escalating, as if the station itself was warning them that lethal conditions were imminent. Ariasa scanned the screen. The data transfer was at 90%. "We're close. Just give me a few more seconds." She quickly initiated a ghost transmission, her movements on the console deft and calculated. "I'll send everything to a secure channel, maybe to an off-site council relay or a known safe contact on Earth's side. If Morrison is on our side, great. But if not, we can't rely on him. We need backups." Jonas nodded, eyes darting toward the door. He could sense the corridor's heat intensifying, the metallic tang of hot air thick on his tongue. Every fiber of his being told him to move, but he refused to abandon Arias's progress. Their survival and the exposure of this clandestine operation depended on this data getting out. He tightened his grip on his pistol, stepping closer to her, ready to defend against any final assault the station might throw at them. The moment the data transfer reached 100%, Ariasa let out a shaky sigh of relief. She tapped one last command to cloak the outgoing transmission. "Done," she said, eyes alight with triumph. "The files are on their way to an undisclosed location. Even if we go down, the truth won't die with us." Jonas felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. Alarms blared at a new pitch, and an automated voice boomed over the station's loudspeakers. "Secondary venting sequence imminent. Please evacuate. This is not a drill." The temperature soared, and the walls groaned, accompanied by a high-pitched hiss that Jonas suspected was superheated air flooding the vents. Arias's face tightened. If they stayed on this level for much longer, they could succumb to the punishing environmental shift. They bolted for the door, Ariasa snatching her encryption buster as they left. The corridor outside was awash in crimson lights and swirling steam. A distant explosion rattled the floor plates. Metal support beams overhead shivered, releasing a cascade of sparks. Jonas scanned both directions, cursing the labyrinth of passages. "We can't go back to the main lifts. Those were blocked or locked down. Let's find an alternate route." Ariasa nodded, fighting the suffocating heat. "There's got to be a subtunnel or emergency hatch leading to the lower docking ports. These places always have a back door." She flicked open a small handheld scanner, a piece of gear she'd kept in reserve. On its display, a rudimentary map of Sub-Level 3 flickered into view, showing possible maintenance shafts that fed into the base of the facility. Following the scanner, they sprinted down a side corridor that angled downward. Every so often, the station shook and overhead pipes burst, showering them with hot condensation. The air was thick enough to taste, bitter with chemicals. Jonas's armor scuffed against the walls as he sidestepped piles of debris. They passed a row of old storage lockers, some half open with scattered tools. When they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with a figure standing in their path, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a uniform that bore the Earth Fleet's insignia. Ariessa froze, raising her weapon on instinct, but Jonas recognized him immediately. "Admiral Morrison?" he breathed, torn between shock and suspicion. Admiral Patrick Morrison held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. Sweat matted his silver-threaded hair, and his chest heaved from exertion. "At ease, Commander Carter," he said, voice low and urgent. "I'm not your enemy." His gaze flicked to Ariessa, noting her gear. "And you must be the Irian operative. I've been tracking both of you since you tripped the facility's security." Jonas's grip on his pistol didn't ease. "With all due respect, sir, we've got no reason to trust you. We just watched you on the station feed, apparently leading a group of soldiers." Morrison shook his head. "That was a ruse. I've been working undercover for months, feeding disinformation to the ones truly developing these weapons." He cast a quick glance over his shoulder, as if expecting pursuit. "You two confirmed exactly what I needed to prove, that humans refuse to give up when given the obvious solution. Cutting off her arm would have been simple. You proved we take the harder path." Arias exchanged a look with Jonas, confusion and curiosity mingling in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice taut. "This entire operation," Morrison said quietly, "is bigger than you realize. If you want to live, and if you want this facility shut down for good, follow me. Now." Jonas and Ariessa hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. The urgency of their situation overrode any lingering doubts. Superheated air streamed through the vents, each breath turning heavier as the station's environment sank closer to lethal levels. They trailed after Admiral Morrison, who navigated the labyrinthine corridors with remarkable speed, even as the bulkheads rattled around them. "We'll talk once we're safe," Morrison called over his shoulder. "There's a small hangar bay on the southwestern edge of Sub-Level 4. If we can get to it, I have a stealth shuttle prepped for extraction." That revelation only deepened Jonas's suspicion that the Admiral was indeed running a covert operation, one complex enough to position resources throughout the station. Nevertheless, survival was paramount, and so they followed his lead down a flight of half-broken stairs. Flames licked at the walls from ruptured piping, and every second they lingered felt like borrowed time. At the bottom of the stairs, an automated bulkhead sealed off their route. Morrison knelt before its control panel, typing furiously to override the security. The effort was complicated by the station's meltdown. Emergency protocols vied with his commands, each beep of protest spelling more wasted time. Ariessa could feel the sweat beading on her brow, a mixture of heat and tension. She pressed a hand to the throbbing sting in her arm, though the pain was minor compared to the threat of incineration. Finally, the bulkhead ground open, releasing a blast of sweltering air that made them recoil. Beyond was a wide corridor, presumably leading to the southwestern hangar. Ariessa steeled herself and hurried forward, Jonas at her side. Morrison motioned for them to keep low, pointing toward a cluster of silhouettes in the distance. Station guards, armed with rifles and searching the area in organized sweeps. "We can't blast through them, not without attracting more," Jonas whispered. He scanned the corridor walls until he spotted a narrow ventilation shaft overhead, no more than a meter wide. "It's tight, but we can slip through. Sound familiar?" He gave Ariessa a wry smirk, recalling their earlier crawlspace escapades. She managed a faint grin in return, and Morrison silently raised an eyebrow. "We'll go," Morrison decided. "I've got partial clearance codes that might help us bypass the final lock on the shuttle." He gestured for Jonas to boost him. Despite the Admiral's rank, he moved with a soldier's efficiency, hoisting himself into the cramped metal duct. Jonas followed, then extended a hand to Ariessa. As she climbed in, the sounds of guard chatter and the hiss of steam vents underscored the precariousness of their flight. The shaft was stifling, each breath an effort in the superheated air. They inched along, contorting their bodies around protruding cables and overhead supports. The metal beneath their palms felt hot enough to scorch. But as they progressed, the corridor below fell away, and the hum of machinery drowned out the soldier patrols. At a junction in the duct, Morrison paused, checked a small hollow map on his wrist, and then angled toward a downward slope. Within minutes, they reached a grated opening that overlooked a modest hangar bay. Jonas peered through the slats, spotting a sleek, matte gray craft parked off to one side, partially obscured by cargo containers. A door on the far end revealed a catwalk leading outward. If that was indeed their stealth shuttle, it was their best and only chance of escaping alive. Morrison carefully removed the grate, and they dropped down one by one into the hangar's upper walkway. Overhead floodlights cast harsh white beams across the polished floor, and the swirling heat from the station's meltdown was a bit more bearable here, thanks to heavier ventilation fans. Jonas kept his pistol raised, scanning for immediate threats. Ariessa crouched beside him, her empathic instincts, though subtle compared to some telepathic species, still alert to tension or hostility in their surroundings. Only a handful of automated loading mechs moved among the cargo crates, seemingly oblivious to the meltdown alarms. Morrison pointed to the stealth shuttle. "We need to cross this open floor to reach the cockpit," he said quietly. "Once aboard, I can initiate a partial override of the station's lockdown, enough to open the bay doors. But we must act fast." Jonas exchanged a quick glance with Ariessa. "Let's do it." He signaled 3, 2, 1 with his fingers, and they sprinted down the metal staircase leading to the hangar floor. Their footfalls echoed in the cavernous space. Halfway across, a voice rang out, amplified by a helmet speaker. "Halt! Identify yourselves!" 4 security troopers emerged from behind a stack of crates, rifles aimed. Jonas dove behind a low wall, returning fire with tight bursts of plasma rounds. Ariessa slid beside him, cursing under her breath. She was down to her last spare energy cell. Morrison ducked behind a metal pillar, searching his uniform for a stun grenade or something to gain an advantage. "We don't have time for this," Morrison hissed, glancing at the overhead monitors. Each flicker of status readout confirmed the station was moments from critical venting. If they continued exchanging fire, the meltdown would kill them all anyway. Jonas locked eyes with Ariessa, then cast a look at a tall cargo container behind which the troopers were taking partial cover. A plan formed in the silent communication of battered veterans. "Cover me," he said to Ariessa. He adjusted a small cylindrical charge on his belt, an explosive designed not to kill but to detonate with a bright flash and concussive force. Ariessa rose, firing a volley of suppressive shots at the troopers. The muzzle flare lit her determined face. Jonas sprinted around the perimeter, sliding to a halt near the cargo container. With practiced speed, he planted the charge on the crate's lower edge and activated the short fuse. 3 seconds. He dived away just as it burst in a deafening pop of light and force. The container's contents, likely inert materials, spilled across the floor. The troopers reeled from the shockwave, stumbling backward and firing wildly. Before they could recover, Jonas and Ariessa converged, disarming 2 troopers with quick, close combat strikes. Morrison stepped in with surprising agility, landing an elbow strike that felled a third. The 4th tried to scramble away, but a final shot from Ariessa's pistol sent the rifle skittering from his grasp. The path to the shuttle was clear. Sirens wailed louder, and the overhead screens flashed meltdown warnings. "Go!" Jonas ordered, and they sprinted toward the sleek stealth craft. The vessel's access ramp lowered at Morrison's command. The interior lights flickered on, revealing a compact but advanced cockpit lined with instrumentation. As they piled inside, the hangar's overhead klaxon blared, venting in T-minus 60 seconds. Time was all but gone. Ariessa barely caught her breath as she secured the shuttle's hatch. Jonas slid into the co-pilot seat, while Morrison took the helm. The Admiral's fingers flew across the console, entering a series of override codes that dimmed the cabin lights and initiated the stealth systems. Outside, the hangar doors creaked, resisting the override. The meltdown protocols clearly aimed to seal the station, condemning any internal craft to remain locked inside. "Come on," Morrison growled, feeding another layer of clearance codes. The overhead lighting in the bay flickered ominously, and the entire station groaned as if on the brink of collapse. At last, a final beep signaled partial success. The large exterior doors rumbled open, revealing a sliver of star-filled void. Arisa allowed herself one tense exhale of relief as the thrusters engaged. The shuttle rose smoothly off the floor, pivoted, and shot forward through the widening gap. Fire and sparks cascaded behind them, erupting from structural failures within the hangar. A wave of superheated air whooshed out, momentarily buffeting the craft. But the shuttle's inertial dampeners held steady as Morrison navigated them into open space. Within seconds, they were clear of the station's gravity plating, drifting in the emptiness beyond. Jonas peered out the side window at the looming facility, a silent, behemoth structure, partially hidden behind swirling debris. Lights flickered across its exterior, and plumes of smoke vented from multiple points. Ariessa felt a pang of realization that they'd left behind an entire covert weapons lab that might very well self-destruct before the Council could investigate in person. Yet they had transmitted data off-world, enough to expose the truth. Morrison engaged autopilot, then turned to face Jonas and Ariessa, his expression taut with a mixture of relief and urgency. "We're safe for the moment," he began, "but I need you both to hear me out. I've been leading a special counterintelligence operation for the last 6 months. The Council was informed that Earth might be developing species-specific weapons. My job was to feed misinformation to the real conspirators, some among the Council itself, while gathering evidence of their involvement." Jonas felt conflicting waves of anger and understanding. "So you orchestrated these traps, like the adhesive compound, for infiltration teams to stumble upon, all so you could prove how humans respond under pressure?" Morrison nodded. "Exactly. The entire plan hinged on demonstrating that humans refuse to take the easy path, even under extreme conditions. Your refusal to amputate Ariessa's arm showcased our core principle. We protect life, find alternatives, no matter the cost. The conspirators wanted proof that humans were as reckless as they feared, that we do whatever was expedient or brutal. You proved the opposite, and now we have the data to expose them." Ariessa's mind whirred, recalling the near disaster with her arm. She turned a questioning look at Jonas, her expression torn. "So all of that was part of a bigger plan?" Jonas laid a hand on her shoulder, gentling her confusion. "We still saved your arm," he murmured, "and that was my choice, no matter what plan Morrison had. I wasn't about to let you suffer if there was another way." Morrison cleared his throat. "We've transmitted enough intel to force an emergency council session, but the conspirators may have their own spin. We need you two to testify, to show them the real nature of humanity and of this entire scheme." Silence settled in the cockpit, broken only by the shuttle's engines humming. At last, Ariessa sank into a seat. "I suppose we've come this far," she said quietly. "No sense turning back now. If the Council is behind some of this, it might take everything we've got to prove the truth." Jonas exhaled, a faint smile flickering across his lips as he looked at her, remembering the first moment he'd refused to cut her arm. "Humans don't give up easily," he said, "and I think you've seen that for yourself." The capital world of the Galactic Council, Meridia Prime, glimmered with an otherworldly radiance as the stealth shuttle cut through the planet's atmosphere. Through the cockpit windows, Lieutenant Commander Jonas Carter watched star-flecked twilight give way to the planet's layered cityscapes. Towers of crystalline spires pierced the skyline, each glimmering under the pastel glow of Meridia's trinary moons. Beside him, Ariessa Ven sat quietly, her metallic blue skin reflecting stray dashes of colored light. Despite the breathtaking vista, tension lay thick in the shuttle's cockpit. They were en route to a highly anticipated emergency session of the Galactic Council, an assembly that could determine the fate of interspecies relations for decades to come. Seated behind them, Admiral Patrick Morrison finished keying in landing codes on a discrete console link. The hum of the stealth engines lowered to a quieter vibration, indicating an approved approach corridor. "We've got clearance for one of the private docking platforms," Morrison announced, sliding a datapad across the console. "Council security is on high alert after our covert transmissions, so expect thorough checks. But at least we won't be arrested on sight." Jonas breathed a measured sigh, recalling how close they'd come to death in that meltdown-prone facility not long ago. It'll be a challenge, he admitted, eyes flicking to Ariasa. The council might fear we've brought a Trojan horse to their doorstep. After all, they've been bombarded with rumors that humans were behind these unethical weapons. Ariasa nodded, flexing her left arm absent-mindedly, as if confirming it was still whole. The memory of the adhesive trap flashed in her mind. Irians, my people, have historically sided with the Council on matters of weapons regulation, she said. If the Council truly believed the rumors about humanity, it'd confirm every suspicion they have, that humans are stubborn, unpredictable, and willing to employ cruelty. They might resent being proven wrong or just as likely double down on false narratives. Morrison's voice carried a note of sympathy. We'll present everything we uncovered. The partial data from the station is damning enough to turn heads. The question is whether we can shift hearts. That's where your personal testimony comes in. He looked pointedly at Jonas. Your refusal to simply cut away the problem, in this case Ariasa's arm, was the demonstration I needed to finalize my intelligence operation. You proved that humans don't just rely on brute force or expediency. We seek better ways, even under pressure. Jonas met Ariasa's gaze, recalling the moment he'd jerry-rigged a device to neutralize the adhesive. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet it was only days. I didn't do it for show, he reminded Morrison, a hint of steel in his voice. I did it because losing an arm or losing Ariasa wasn't an acceptable outcome. If that helps us prove a point, fine. But that's secondary to saving lives. The shuttle glided onto a platform high above Meridia Prime's marble-like courtyards. Thousands of delegates and staff bustled across the planet's surface, streaming through roads of levitating causeways and shimmering gates. A cluster of robed attendants waited near their designated docking pad. Ariasa's heart pounded, sensing the significance of this moment. Everything hinged on what would happen inside the Grand Council Hall. As the shuttle completed its final landing sequence, the sun of Meridia crested the horizon, bathing them in light. Jonas powered down the engines, turning to face the Admiral and Ariasa. Ready? He asked softly. Their eyes locked, silently reaffirming a bond forged in crisis. Both nodded. There was no turning back now, only the hope that courage and truth would be enough to reshape the future. The Grand Council Hall rose from the cityscape like a sculpted crystal dome, refracting sunlight in shifting rainbows across its translucent walls. Sweeping arches of polished stone formed a broad entrance plaza where dozens of species mingled. Jonas and Ariasa followed Admiral Morrison up a set of marble steps, their uniforms drawing stares of curiosity and concern alike. A pair of reptilian Desri guards, armed with halberd-like energy weapons, stood watch at the towering double doors. Their scaled heads turned to track the humans, an all-too-familiar sign of suspicion toward Earth natives. Once inside, they passed through multiple security scans. Each station demanded identification, scanning retinas, genetic markers, and digital credentials. The tension in Jonas's chest eased only slightly when the final checkpoint cleared them without incident. It was clear that Morrison's high-level codes still carried enough weight to secure an audience. Soon they emerged into the main assembly chamber, a vast circular amphitheater encircled by tiered balconies for the council delegates. At the center of the floor, a raised platform awaited them. Holographic projectors dotted the perimeter, designed to magnify and record every moment of testimony. Ariasa recognized the delegates of her own species near the front row, garbed in teal robes. Their stiff postures suggested both curiosity and wariness. Farther to the right, Jonas spotted the robed figure of High Regent Soln from the Relian sector, an influential voice often critical of Earth's policies. Arrayed around them were ambassadors and representatives of half a dozen other worlds, Andromons, Centaurites, Seraphim, and more. Each species with its own distinct physiologies, attire, and biases. A clarion tone rang out, signaling the beginning of the emergency session. A tall avian counselor, Dalek Orn, spread her iridescent wings to command silence. Esteemed delegates, we are convened under Article 7 of the Interstellar Accords, she announced in a resonant voice. We gather to examine allegations concerning unauthorized weapons research, potential sabotage of Council treaties, and the role of Earth's military representatives in these events. Murmurs rippled across the galleries. Jonas swallowed hard as he stepped onto the platform with Ariasa and Morrison. The Admiral began by presenting formal credentials, referencing the Special Intelligence Directive that empowered him to investigate threats to the Accords. As Morrison spoke, the floating projectors displayed captured images of the clandestine facility, its labs of adhesive compounds, and the meltdown they'd narrowly escaped. When it came time to detail the extent of the conspiracy, Morrison deferred to Ariessa. She stepped forward, golden eyes scanning the assembled delegates, her voice echoing through the chamber. I am Ariessa Venn, an Irian operative. I participated in this infiltration unknowing of Morrison's overarching plan. Yet what I witnessed was beyond doubt. A station dedicated to species-targeted weapon designs, including advanced adhesives that can immobilize or fuse limbs based on our unique biologies. She paused, recalling the pain and terror of nearly losing her arm. We recovered enough data, now transmitted to secure channels, to prove that at least part of the operation was funded by rogue elements within the Council. Furthermore, Earth's involvement, as widely rumored, was a deliberate smokescreen. A subtle stir swept the delegates. Some shot skeptical glares at Morrison. Others, particularly from species that had long distrusted humanity, bristled with disbelief. Ariessa could feel the doubt emanating in waves. Jonas stepped forward to add his testimony, recalling the exact moment he'd saved her limb. Every so-called logical approach pointed to amputation, he said, voice firm. But we refused. That refusal isn't an act of human arrogance. It's the core of what we stand for. We don't abandon people or possibilities without exhausting every option. As the session progressed, Admiral Morrison directed the Council's attention to the final portion of the data they'd uncovered, encrypted files proving that hidden factions within the Council had stoked paranoia about humanity's so-called brutality. Holographic windows displayed a complex network of communications, messages exchanged between certain Council officials and off-the-books labs, referencing coded projects aimed at controlling or curbing unpredictable species. Among these transmissions were chilling references to adaptive adhesives, biotargeting toxins, and gene scramble prototypes. Jonas and Ariessa exchanged uneasy glances as the full scale of the conspiracy laid bare. This was no small set of renegades. It was a sophisticated effort to sow fear, possibly to ensure the Council retained tight oversight over new species, particularly humans. The conspirators had calculated that if humans were provoked into desperate or violent action, it would justify reining them in. But Jonas's improvised solution with Ariessa's arm had foiled that plan, showcasing humanity's refusal to accept a cruel shortcut. High Regent Soln stood, his voice reverberating. This is remarkable, if true. We have long voiced concern about human stubbornness. But to see Council members implicated in fostering that very trait as a threat, this begs explanation. Admiral Morrison nodded gravely. For the past half-year, I have cooperated with certain trusted Council officials to set traps, feeding illusions of Earth's complicity to those with hidden agendas. Our objective was to collect indisputable proof. He gestured to Jonas and Ariessa. They provided the final piece, an unequivocal demonstration that humans will not opt for barbaric, simplistic solutions. That was precisely the outcome these conspirators feared. Human ingenuity working for good, not destruction. Some delegates listened with open skepticism. Others exchanged wary whispers. One silver-skinned Androman ambassador rose, folding multiple crystalline arms. If these allegations are correct, what of the existing narratives claiming humans sought to build universal adhesives for warfare? Clearly, the meltdown at the facility and the attempt on Ms. Venn's life suggests a more sinister plot at play. Morrison turned to Jonas and Ariessa. A hush fell. Jonas set his shoulders. In that facility, we found designs targeting more than just Irians, scans for weapons that exploit the biology of half a dozen species. The ones behind this project wanted to pin blame on Earth or any other convenient scapegoat, sowing enough distrust that the Council would accept further militarization. My guess is these conspirators sought to centralize power. They nearly succeeded. A wave of murmurs and exclamations rippled around the chamber. Ariessa took a single step forward, looking directly at the Irian delegation. My own government has been wary of humans for a long time. We believe them quick to violence, inclined to solve problems with force. Yet in my most desperate moment, a human refused to do the expedient thing that any battlefield medic might deem necessary. He fought for a better outcome. That wasn't for show. That was his instinct. Across the amphitheater, delegates leaned in, some frowning, others nodding with dawning realization. The tension in the room morphed into a more complex energy, an undercurrent of both awe and lingering doubt. High Regent Soln tapped his staff on the polished floor. "What would Earth have us do now?" he asked, suspicion and cautious hope mingling in his tone. Morrison let out a measured breath. "We propose a deeper interspecies unity initiative, with Jonas Carter and Ariessa Venn at the forefront. Let them demonstrate how we can find innovative, humane solutions. Let them forge alliances where others stoke fear." The debate that followed was nothing short of tumultuous. Delegates questioned every facet of Morrison's revelations, from the chain of evidence tying the hidden faction to council insiders, to the notion that humans would champion a more compassionate alternative to conflict. Fierce arguments broke out, revealing old resentments over past wars or contested resources. Throughout the heated back and forth, Jonas and Ariessa stood at the center platform, silent yet resolute, occasionally answering direct inquiries about the specifics of the clandestine facility. An hour into the proceedings, a hush fell as a series of large screens descended from the dome's ceiling. Each screen displayed footage from the meltdown station, recordings transmitted by Jonas and Ariessa before their escape. They saw themselves navigating the cramped corridors, heard the alarm klaxons blaring, and watched the moment Jonas neutralized the adhesive encasing Ariessa's arm. The entire council chamber witnessed Jonas's improvised device peel away the crystallizing substance, revealing her unscarred limb beneath. Although the footage was raw, the clarity of Ariessa's pain and Jonas's dogged refusal to accept amputation rang through in every frame. Ariessa's stomach twisted, reliving the ordeal, but she also felt a swell of pride, sensing that this visual proof was igniting a new perspective among the delegates. Murmurs transformed to stunned silence. The next clip showed them confronting the station's lethal meltdown, searching for a better path, ultimately escaping with the stolen data. Even High Regent Soln appeared transfixed, his elongated pupils dilating in thought. When the screens retracted, an Androman delegate cleared his throat. "Commander Carter, why did you do this? You risked your own life, and arguably the operation's integrity, to find a non-lethal method of saving Ms. Venn's arm. Surely standard practice on many battlefields is to amputate rather than risk spreading contaminants." Jonas fixed the delegate with a determined stare. "Because Ariessa Venn is more than a casualty to be minimized. She's a person, and if there's a chance to preserve her life and limb, I'll take it. My people, humans, are indeed stubborn. Sometimes that means we find solutions nobody else believes exist." A rising murmur swept through the chamber, this time tinged with something akin to respect. Ariessa noticed her fellow Ireans exchanging glances. She could feel in the tilt of their heads a reconsideration of deep-rooted stereotypes. A second avian counselor fluttered her bright plumage. "Admiral Morrison, you propose an interspecies unity initiative. That is ambitious, especially in the face of newly revealed conspiracies. Why would it succeed now?" Morrison stepped forward. "Because mistrust festers in the dark. We've dragged these hidden plots into the light. We need open collaboration, shared oversight, and alliances that rely on empathy, not suspicion. Under the guidance of Carter and Venn, we can show every species that solutions exist beyond violent extremes. Their partnership itself is proof of that." The council fell into deep discussion once again. Amid the swirl of debate, Jonas caught Ariessa's gaze. Despite the grand stage and potential political backlash, he saw only relief and trust mirrored in her gold-flecked eyes. Together they stood on the precipice of reshaping how the galaxy perceived humanity, and forging a future where cross-species efforts might become the norm rather than the exception. A series of voting rounds consumed the rest of the day, with delegates calling for recesses to confer with their homeworlds. The tension within the Grand Council Hall fluctuated between heated arguments and quiet reflection. Jonas and Ariessa fielded direct questions while Admiral Morrison navigated the more intricate legal aspects. Finally, late into Meridia Prime's evening, Counselor Dalek Orn summoned them back to the center of the chamber for the verdict. In a measured tone, Dalek began, "After rigorous deliberation, this council acknowledges the veracity of Admiral Morrison's intelligence report. Numerous transmissions confirm that rogue elements, including certain council officials, orchestrated hidden weapons programs to foster distrust of humanity. The immediate effect is that those suspects will be placed under formal investigation and their roles suspended pending further inquiry." A murmur of approval and disapproval alike rippled across the assembly. Jonas risked a sidelong glance at Ariesa, who seemed poised, her shoulders squared. Dalek continued, "Furthermore, we recognize the heroic actions of Lieutenant Commander Jonas Carter and Operative Ariesa Venn in exposing this scheme at grave personal risk. Their example, particularly Commander Carter's refusal to resort to the easiest method when saving Ms. Venn, exemplifies a more hopeful future for interspecies relations." That statement sparked a fresh wave of chatter, though it trended more positive. Ariesa felt some measure of pride, but she also sensed the profound responsibility settling on her shoulders. She glanced at Jonas, reading a similar mixture of relief and determination in his eyes. Dalek flared her wings in a ceremonial gesture, signaling quiet. In light of these findings, the Council has decided to endorse an interspecies unity initiative. Carter and Venn, your proposed mission is to lead specialized teams, traveling among Council worlds to demonstrate shared solutions, ethical technology exchanges, and collaborative problem-solving. A hush fell, followed by a sporadic applause and cautious nods of approval. Jonas blinked in surprise, the weight of the new assignment hitting him fully. Ariesa felt her pulse quicken. It wasn't just a token gesture. The Council was effectively entrusting them to spearhead a new era of cooperation. If they succeeded, it might forever change the narrative around humans. If they failed, it would affirm the darkest suspicions about Earth's inability to integrate peacefully. Counselor Orn added a final note. You will report to a cross-species oversight panel, ensuring accountability and transparency. Now to address the final motion. Earth's Admiral Morrison has requested partial resignation from active fleet duties to continue his intelligence work in a more covert capacity. That request, for the time being, is approved. She nodded respectfully at Morrison, then turned back to Jonas and Ariesa. With this session, we conclude official proceedings, but the real work begins. May your unity be genuine and your stubbornness well placed. An orchestral chime signaled the official close of the emergency session. The assembled delegates rose in a collective rustle of robes, feathers, and metallic limbs. Morrison exhaled, a faint, triumphant smile forming. He reached out to clasp Jonas's shoulder. Well done, Commander. And you, Operative Venn. Ariesa softened at the Admiral's tone. It seems we've got quite a task ahead, she murmured, glancing at Jonas. A swirl of mingled excitement and trepidation coursed through her. But at least we're not heading into it alone. Jonas nodded. We've been through worse. We'll handle it, together. Their eyes locked for a moment, recalling the synergy that had carried them through the meltdown facility. Neither could deny the connection formed when Jonas refused to take the easy way out. Now, that same bond would shape the galaxy's view of humanity if they played their cards right. Once formalities ended, Ariesa and Jonas found a rare moment of calm in a secluded garden terrace behind the council hall. Meridia Prime's 3 moons were rising overhead, each casting silvery beams that danced across lush, bioluminescent foliage. A gentle hum of water emanated from a winding stream, adding to the serene atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the day's turmoil. Leaning on a marble railing, Ariesa inhaled the floral-scented air. You know, she said softly, turning her gaze to Jonas, when we first met in that dingy corridor, I had you pegged as just another human soldier, reckless, duty-bound, and quick to cut corners if it meant survival. Jonas huffed a quiet laugh, removing a glove to rub the back of his neck. I was pretty sure you saw me as an inconvenience at best, or a misguided do-gooder at worst. A small smile curved Ariesa's lips. I'm glad we both proved each other wrong. She gently rotated her left shoulder, the one once trapped by that hideous adhesive. Sometimes I still feel that phantom pressure, like the adhesive is there. Then I remember how it ended. You challenged my assumptions about humans in ways I never expected. Jonas stepped closer, his usually guarded gray eyes reflecting the moonlight. Stubbornness doesn't have to be destructive, he said, voice low. We can be stubborn for the right reasons, like refusing to abandon someone in need, even if the cost is high. Their conversation drifted, the tension and formality of the council session peeling away under the gentle moonlight. Eventually, Jonas produced a small case from his jacket pocket. I've been working with the Admiral's tech people, he explained, opening the lid to reveal a slender bracelet made of a shimmering alloy. Hints of faint circuitry lines ran across its surface, reminiscent of the improvised neutralizer he'd used on her arm. We took the principles behind that neutralizing device and repurposed them into something new, sort of a token, a reminder. Ariasa's eyes glowed in awe. It's beautiful, she whispered, letting Jonas fasten it around her wrist. The cool metal felt strangely comforting, a physical embodiment of how a violent tool had been transformed into a symbol of connection. Jonas shrugged, a hint of self-consciousness creeping in. Well, I figured it beats scarring or losing a limb, right? And it stands for everything we're trying to do with this initiative. Turn danger into collaboration, find better paths, that kind of thing. Her gaze lingered on the bracelet. Thank you, she said, voice catching. This means more than you know. She shifted closer to him, her empathic senses flickering with the subtle warmth of his presence. And not just because of the mission. He gently touched her cheek, the corner of his mouth lifting. Everything we do from here on will face scrutiny, people questioning whether our partnership is merely political convenience or something real. Ariasa chuckled softly. We've literally risked our lives for each other. That's plenty real to me. She tilted her head, pressing her hand against his chest. Let them speculate. We know the truth. In the hush of the moonlit garden, with the distant hum of galactic politics receding, Jonas lowered his head to hers. Their kiss was soft and unhurried, yet it carried the weight of shared trials and an unspoken promise. As they parted, Ariasa felt renewed conviction that whatever obstacles lay ahead, be it council skeptics or lingering conspiracies, they would face them together. 1 year later, the Interspecies Unity Initiative was well underway, and Jonas Carter found himself standing in a site that triggered a powerful sense of déjà vu, a near-identical maintenance tunnel to the one where he'd first met Ariasa Venn. This time, though, the corridor wasn't teeming with lethal traps. Instead, it was being converted into a demonstration module for non-lethal defensive technologies. A team of Relian engineers bustled about, installing neutralizing devices based on Jonas's original design. Ariasa stood alongside a group of Irian observers, calmly explaining how the adhesives and neutralizers worked in tandem. She wore a light uniform embroidered with the Unity Initiative crest, an interlocking circle that symbolized cooperation among different worlds. Her left wrist gleamed with the bracelet Jonas had given her, a constant reminder of new beginnings. In the years since the council hearing, they had traveled across multiple star systems, showcasing that compassion and ingenuity could bridge cultural gaps. Their successes were heralded in some corners and doubted in others, but each small victory chipped away at centuries of mistrust. And that concludes our demonstration, Ariasa said, concluding her explanation to the Irian observers. They murmured with approval, many taking detailed notes for possible replication on their own worlds. Jonas lingered on the sideline, letting her handle the spotlight. He'd come to admire her blend of analytical precision and empathetic communication, a skill he knew stemmed from her experiences, and from the unwavering drive that had once urged him to save her arm. When the crowd dispersed for a midday break, Ariasa approached Jonas, her golden eyes reflecting satisfaction. They want to discuss mass production, she said. It's surreal seeing something once used for hidden warfare become a universally accepted safeguard. She absently touched her bracelet. Remember how we both believed we'd never set foot in a place like this again? Jonas grinned. Back then, the only reason to come down these tunnels was to avoid being shot at or glued to a wall. He surveyed the corridor's new equipment, each neutralizing device bearing the initiative's emblem. Now they'll be used to prevent injuries and encourage de-escalation instead of fueling paranoia. A voice interrupted them, a junior aide from Earth, a woman in crisp Navy attire. Commander Carter, Operative Venn, the council representatives have arrived for their inspection tour. They're hoping for a walkthrough of the facility's upgrades. We'll be there, Jonas replied with a polite nod, and the aide hurried off. As he turned back to Ariessa, he found her smiling in that warm, quiet way he'd come to cherish. Can you believe it? He asked softly. A year ago, we were risking everything to prove a point. Now we're guiding official tours. Ariessa reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers. I can believe it, she said, her voice rich with emotion. We're stubborn, remember? When humans and Irians decide something's worth fighting for, we don't stop. In the background, an automated message reminded visitors to check in before entering restricted zones, a calm, procedural echo of the once deadly environment they'd survived. Jonas gave her hand a gentle squeeze. We proved that stubbornness isn't about mindless defiance. It's about refusing to accept a bad outcome when a better one is possible. Our partnership convinced the Council that humanity's unpredictability can be a force for positive change, if guided by empathy. Ariessa leaned in, pressing her forehead softly against his. In that small moment of intimacy, she remembered the searing agony in her arm, the frantic scramble through a meltdown station, and the frantic council debates. Each challenge had forged and tempered their bond. And it's far from over, she murmured. We still have entire sectors that distrust the initiative. Countless worlds remain convinced humans can't be trusted, or that the Council is irredeemably corrupt. He lifted her chin, smiling, his eyes reflecting both tenderness and unwavering resolve. Then we'll keep proving them wrong, one day at a time. She returned his smile, emotions shining in her golden eyes. Always. Their lips met in a light, affirming kiss, the distant hum of new construction framing the moment. It was a reminder that, even in a galaxy fraught with conspiracies and shifting alliances, some foundations could be built on trust, compassion, and the refusal to take the easy way out. For Jonas Carter and Ariessa Venn, that refusal had saved a life, changed perceptions, and ignited a movement with the power to reshape the stars. From the cramped maintenance tunnels to the towering spires of the council chambers, this story has shown us how a single act of compassion can cascade into galactic change. The human refusal to accept amputation when it seemed the only option became a shining example of hope, a testament to what can be achieved when we look beyond mere survival and dare to protect what truly matters. A year later, our heroes stand at the forefront of a groundbreaking initiative, transforming once lethal technologies into tools of preservation. It's a triumphant reminder that empathy and resilience can surmount even the deepest divides. If this journey resonated with you, please share your thoughts below. Comment and let us know which moment impacted you most or which character you connected with. And remember to subscribe for more stories that highlight humanity's stubborn brilliance in the face of the unknown.